Oh, if there's a problem, let me try again. All right. Welcome to Cracking the Rich Code podcast. I'm your host, Pete Beskus, and with us today is Victor Ballara. Victor is a master coach, and he's also certified executive coach. He is one of our authors in Cracking the Rich Code. He is in book 12, and his chapter is I'll Know It When I See It. Welcome to the podcast, Victor.
Thank you, Pete. Appreciate being here.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got here, and then we'll, dive into a little bit about what you've contributed to the Rich Code.
Absolutely. Well, really thank you for inviting me onto the program. I spent my whole career, and I hate to say it, the number 40 years in HR, and half of it was spent in consulting, EY and Korn Ferry, the largest firms out there. And after that, decided I wanted to be one of those HR people. So I got into a startup, didn't know it was a startup, wound up growing it to 400 employees as chief HR officer. And after that, a couple other companies along the way. The last corporate gig was director of HR for $1 billion engineering firm. So I've been there. I've been through a lot of the hoops, and I understand what it's like to live in an HR with an HR hat. And about 10 years ago, decided I needed to refresh my credentials, did not want to go back to a terminal degree. So I became certified as a coach. The coach train program is very rigorous, and I'm really glad that I went through it. And I've been coaching executives ever since.
Well, that's really interesting. What do you see as the biggest problem or misconception that you're bringing to the table for these executives, when you're trying to solve their problems?
Wow, Pete, where do I start? I think the biggest issue is a lack of self-awareness. They're there, they've arrived, maybe they're a vice president or CXO, and so they're perfect, right? There isn't anything they need to do differently. The problem is, they don't understand who they are and the impact they're having. I call that the shadow of the leader. They don't understand the shadow that they cast. And so my job as independent third-party objective viewers to help them see who they are, help them understand the impact they have on others, and to help them develop as leaders.
So, and I am fascinated by leadership coaching and by, how we in any arena manage the people around us, whether it's, in a corporate setting or in your own business or even with your own family. What would you say is something that's overlooked? Like you said, self-awareness is one key. What's another quality or impact that gets overlooked by leaders?
Well, I'd love to talk about this stuff, Pete. I could go on forever. If I were to pick one thing, I would say feedback. Being able to provide genuine, qualitative, performance-related feedback to your peers, to your spouse, whomever. And I think leaders get it wrong. They think it's got to be criticism, or it comes out as criticism, and it's got to be developmental. So you sit down with an employee and say, hey, I've noticed some things. I'd like to talk to you about it. Are you open to feedback? So ask permission, and then let them know what's working, what's not working with specifics. And I try to say, avoid the good dog syndrome. Do you have pets, Pete?
Yeah, we've got a little puppy right now. He's about 5 months old.
Oh, wow. So you're definitely in the feedback mode. But, you pat the puppy on the head and you say, good dog. And the dog wags his tail. he doesn't know what you said. He just feels good about it. And that's what I help leaders understand. Don't do the good dog feedback loop. Be specific, make it performance related and developmental, so that at the end of the conversation, the employee doesn't leave scratching his head saying, was that good or was that bad, or what am I supposed to do differently?
Mhm. So, what's kind of one of the underrated qualities that, I think we all had bad leaders, right? And that's kind of, and I think we're in an era right now where the lack of leadership, across the board is really, really striking. Like, I think we're all very, very aware of it. So, what's an underrated quality from some of the best leaders and the things that you kind of teach to the executives that you work with?
Well, I think one of the things that comes to mind is authenticity. Being genuine and authentic is important for building trust rather than putting on airs, being somebody you're not. It helps foster a sense of credibility and relatability. So, for instance, you know, being genuine about who you are and what you're feeling. Pete, right now, I'm really frustrated and I need to talk to you about some things, And you know what, to be honest, I have problems with this too, So, you're down to earth, you're kind of the everyday guy, rather than I'm the boss and you're not. So do
Well,
as I say.
yeah, that's how a lot of businesses though are set up. And especially, I've been, in corporate. I still run a team of over 75 people. I've also owned my own business. So it's really interesting that the leadership hats, even though we change them and we wear them, there's that intrinsic, what's our selfish motivation as leaders, right? So how do you help people to remove themselves from that kind of selfish desire, which is, if you own your own business, it's my bottom line. Or if you're a corporate leader, which is the metrics that we're trying to chase, how do you kind of help people separate from that a little bit so they can empower and get their people to execute for them?
Got to give that some thought. I think that's a master's thesis. Um, so I guess what comes top of my mind, and my mind's a pretty cluttered monkey brain at the moment, so I've got to sort that out. I guess what comes to the top is we're all in this together. If you think of a crew out in rowing, we've got to row together, and here's our goal. Here's where we're headed. Here's what your role is. And I think I help leaders understand, how to communicate that in a way that's not condescending, that's authentic, as I mentioned. And I think from the heart, it's funny, every time I'm in a coaching session and I say, you know what, Pete, how are you feeling right now? And what immediately comes out of their mouth is, I think. So they just went from their heart to their brain.
Mhm.
I need to keep them in their heart so that it's all heart-centered authenticity. That makes sense?
That makes total sense. Like, it's one of those things that I've also noticed as well, because, I think a lot of people see leaders as being the extroverts, the outgoing people, the, rah types. But, I think what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, there is a place for all types of leaderships, and that authenticity needs to really come through. How do I think one of the concepts that we were talking a little bit offline was that idea of building from within versus pulling from without. Maybe you can dive into a little topic, talk around that concept a little bit, and we can explore what comes out of that.
Well, thank you for that, Pete, because that's really what I'm passionate about. Um, you know, in my last corporate job, it frustrated me to no end to see executives choose to hire strangers, on the outside who have great resumes and choose to pay market rates, which is that much higher than what we're paying our current people, without giving credence to who do we have, credence and acknowledgement to who do we have internally. So it's this buy versus build.
Mhm.
And shame on you, Company X, if you aren't building more than you're buying. And that's really where I get excited about. And that's helping them build a leadership bench from within. So helping them identify their high potentials. First of all, we've got to know who we're working with. And we have performance data for that. And then secondly, to assess them for a particular job that we might have in mind. Let's say we're looking for a chief sales officer. One client I had, they went to the outside, they paid exorbitant money to somebody they didn't know. And yet one of their director of sales was an exceptional performer. And what they didn't do is assess that person against the model for the chief sales officer role. And so it's assess, develop, and of course, call your coach along the way. We co-create a development plan for that person. And so we can say that, okay, we have 3 or 4 people who are ready now, and we have maybe 3 or 4 behind them who are going to be ready soon. And it's the ready soon that get the development, and they're ready now who get the coaching to prepare them for the new role.
So it's interesting that you say that, because I've had and have firsthand experience. When you look at your team and you look at everyone else, right? When things are going great and you have a high performer, right? It's really challenging to overcome the mindset of I have to replace that person now if they become leadership. How do you approach that dilemma?
Well, first off, I have to incent you as a leader. So if you're giving up a high performer for another job, I mean, good for you because you've developed them. But what's the motivation for you? And so I need to be able, as CEO, to tell you in more than just words. That's the role of a good leader, is developing your replacement. So I think that's really critical. And we don't do that. Oftentimes, if I'm the manager or let's say director, and I've got someone I want promoted and they get promoted out of my department, well, I lose a high performer,
Yeah.
right? And so what I need to do is be incented to not only do that, but develop those high performers behind that person, so I don't lose momentum and productivity.
So how do you then separate out, and I've seen this example, high performers that get promoted that are good at their job, but they aren't good leaders?
Well, that's where that assessment came in that I mentioned before. So we assess the whole person. We don't want to have some technical expert get promoted, and not look at the fact that he has all these dead bodies. He was climbing on the shoulders of others to be successful. So we want to be able to assess them for the role and develop them. So if we've identified those high performers and they go through the assessment and they're lacking in areas of leadership, perhaps, or employee engagement, then we want to put them on a development plan so we can develop and coach them to be ready at the next pass. And that's where my chapter in the book comes into play. It's called I'll Know It When I See It. So I've been coaching high performers, partner track people for this billion-dollar consulting firm for about 5 years. And this started a trend that I was really worried about. So this woman of color, and that's important that you know that, because, we want, it's one thing to be diversity focused on recruiting and promotion, but it's also important, in terms of developing your best talent so that you have those voices out there. And so she came to me. She didn't make partner. So she was referred to me, which is great of the firm. We provided you with a coach. And she said, well, I'm really frustrated. I didn't get promoted to partner. And I said, well, did they tell you why? And she said, yes. They said I'd lacked executive presence. And I said, and this was 5 years ago before I developed this model. I said, wow, what does that mean? She said, well, they never told me. And I said, oh, come on now, this is a real problem. So I had to go to this promotion selection committee and say, okay, look, we've got to define executive presence before I can coach this person. And I have to do a little shame on you guys for not doing that first. So we put our heads together, we came up with this model, and there's like 14 competencies. And for the purpose of development and feedback, I narrowed that down to about 6. And so that became our development plan to coach this woman. But she wasn't the first person. They didn't learn from that conversation. I had 3 more women, who also lacked executive presence. And, it's that age-old adage, women are seen as aggressive, whereas men are assertive. Mm-hmm. And so we have all these inconsistencies in our concepts of leadership and now executive presence. And, I can't take all the credit, but the next cycle she got promoted to partner. So,
I think, well, yeah, that I think is really another conversation for, to dive down into, is the idea of how do you create leaders that, are developed on their metrics and on the merits that they bring to the table versus arbitrary comments like executive presence, right? Like that doesn't mean anything to anybody except I didn't get the job. Right. You did kind of segue beautifully into your chapter. So tell us a little bit about the theme of your chapter, your contribution to Cracking the Rich Code. I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, the chapter talks about Gabriella, this woman that, of course, names have been changed, of course, but the specifics are all the same, about her journey in not becoming partner. She'd been with the firm for 20 years. So imagine you've worked 20 years in a brutal environment, mm-hmm. Consulting, it's up or out. What have you done for me lately? I just sold $1 million project. Great. What do you have in the pipeline? And so I talk about her journey coming to me and the process we went through. I also put together the shortened version of the executive presence competency model in my article, and how we work together as coach and client along this development path.
Now, are those 6 competencies universal, or are they specific to that case?
No, I would say they're pretty, that's a great question, Pete. I'm not sure I've ever been asked that. If I were to look at them, I think they're pretty universal. There are some aspects about image, charisma, and the other one I was thinking, poise and composure, that might get elevated higher because of the environment than others.
So then what are the six?
Oh, I focus so much on all. So it's confidence, communication, poise and composure, authenticity, and then this big one that's kind of charisma, gravitas, and emotional intelligence. Was that six?
Oh, so those are all, you're born with them, right?
Yeah, right.
Well, it's a concept. Again, I think when you nailed those ones out, right? There's this misconception out there that leaders are born, and I'm a big believer that they're created. They're created through effort. They're created through curiosity. They're created through humility because you're willing to go and try these things out. Like, I see in my experiences throughout all the organizations, the best leaders that I always gravitated towards were the ones who were trying, the ones who kept trying and engaging, and they didn't have all the answers. You didn't bring up anything in those six about technical competency.
No.
And that's and somebody who comes from a very science, STEM background, worked in energy as an engineer, always at the, with technical people. A lot of times they're like, whatever you're the best at what you do necessitates that you basically says that you're going to be the leader of this group. And that's not true. Those six qualities, every single person right now can work on, regardless of if they have a coach or if they're part of an executive stream. If you're at the first level of a job, say you're graduating university or you're internshipping, those six qualities, and refresh them for me again, which they were: poise, confidence,
Communication, authenticity, charisma, gravitas, emotional intelligence.
So an 18-year-old who's getting their first job can be practicing those six qualities.
Absolutely. And, I don't want to lose track of a couple things you said that were really great, about leaders, not born, but created. And some are created through the shadow of a bad leader.
Mm-hmm.
So you wind up with leaders who are not very good at it. And it's only because their boss isn't very good at it. So that's a problem. But in fact, this last point you mentioned, these are qualities that you can work on right now. And in the article, I talk about not only the competencies, but the critical success behaviors. Okay, so one thing to define the competency, but the other thing is, what are the behaviors of success that relate to those competencies? And that was one thing that I had to work with this selection committee, because they would look out at this sea of old white guys, and that's not the model we want to build upon, because that's not going to achieve your diversity goals. You need to look at what makes sense in your environment and add in those qualities of diverse ideas, thinking, and mindset. And so that was a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah, and I think that is a challenge. There's, again, the old white guys in the room. Well, I'm becoming an old white guy too in the room. So it's like, yeah, I do see that ability to, we've got to have different ideas and different perspectives, and we have to have a diverse table because that makes us stronger. I did want to go on one of those qualities, one of those six leadership qualities that you kind of brought up, which I find fascinating, is the difference between introverts and extroverts, and the concept of charisma. In industry, we see it every day in our interactions. The charismatic person seems to always be the extrovert, the person who is, has that confidence to go up and talk to people and you jump up with the mic and karaoke or do whatever it is, right? The first person on the dance floor. How do you coach a person who's an introvert on charisma?
Great question. You're not softballing them today.
I never do. I'm just curious. I'm interested. I'm so fascinated by all the conversations. And
Right.
this is something that I noticed, I've seen it over and over again. And especially with the coaching circles that I'm in, there's extroverted coaches like I am, but there's also introverted coaches who, how do they, grasp charisma? How do you teach them about charisma? Because it's not a innate, born with, ability. It's something you can learn.
Well, it is something that you can learn. I guess the first step, and I'm always talking about assessment. The first step is to go back to your Myers-Briggs assessment. And what's funny about that is I've been through Myers-Briggs, which is that, extrovert, introvert, among other qualities, predominantly that we've all experienced. And I can say for a fact, I've been an introvert and I've been an extrovert back and forth 5 times. I forget now which one most. I think mostly I'm an introvert. And what that means is I tend to get more of my energy from small work groups rather than large audiences or big networking events. I'd rather work with, a few people than a lot. And so charisma, of course, as you said, it's not forcing it. We're not trying to create this magnetic presence that draws people to us naturally, because there are leaders who are like that. You and I have seen those.
Mm-hmm.
But it's about inspiring, motivating others, asking, really great questions like you are. I'm really curious about, and you start a conversation. And so it's teaching them techniques for how to be more extroverted as an introvert, if that makes sense.
Yeah, one of the things I love to focus on too is, I know that you mentioned the Myers-Briggs. I'm a big strengths assessment person, and
Yeah.
I always believe that if you're leaning into your strengths, that's where you find your leadership voice, is leaning into those strengths. And one thing I have noticed from extroverts to introverts, introverted people create a safety that extroverts may or may not create. Like, they create a container that's safe for another person to come out of their shell and open up to you. Whereas with an extrovert, my wife says it all the time, my personality fills up a room, right? So I come in and people may feel awkward or not confident enough to share with me if I don't get vulnerable or open up the door for them. But an introvert creates a space of safety. So leaning into that strength and that ability, like you'd mentioned at the very offset, awareness that is what you bring to the table. I think then, it layers in confidence, it layers in poise. Like, it's a fabric of leadership that kind of ties together.
Right. And I think all too often we get judgmental about those extremes, extrovert, introvert, and they, as you said, they all have strengths. So it's about leaning in, like that phrase you used, leaning in to the strengths of whoever you are. But there are some techniques that extroverts utilize that introverts can get comfortable with. And that's, asking questions out of curiosity. Pete, I'm really curious about what you said, and starting that conversation going. And that's always a door opener.
Yeah, I know. I love that. Let me take a quick break here. We're going to pivot a little bit, talk about the Rich Code, pivot about the mastermind a bit. But before we do that, I wanted to just say, to anybody who's listening, if you're a coach, a speaker, thought leader, somebody who wants to get a message out, Cracking the Rich Code right now is sourcing authors for volume 15. We're at volume 15. And also to invite you to join our mastermind, which is getting up to about 300 people strong. So we meet monthly as a group. Victor's in it, I'm in it, Jim's in it. There are so many great thought leaders, so many great different walks of life, businesses, coaches, thought leaders, speakers, everything, all of it. We're all part of this mastermind. It's an amazing group of people. So if you're interested in collaborating, if you're interested in joining us, you can email us or email me at pete@beskusconsultant.com or contact Vic directly to find out more. So now, Victor, what has your experience been like joining the Rich Code group?
Well, you failed to mention the fact that the book's been endorsed by Tony Robbins and has this great foreword by Brian Tracy, one of the all-time, greatest coaches and development gurus. And then, of course, Jim Britt. So it's been a great experience to be part of 18 to 20 people in each volume who all come from a different direction, different place. They may be life coaches, grief coaches, doulas. We have doulas in the book. And to learn from them just through the reading of the book itself and my other contributing colleagues. So that's been a terrific, I didn't even know who I was going to be part of. And you're known by the people, people around you. And I'm really great to be around people like you, Pete, and Jim, and my colleagues.
So what were some of the surprises? Like, I think, for most of us, we jumped in with the idea that, I love to be an author. I want to collaborate with these other great thought leaders. I get to, rub elbows with Jim, and so far in the mastermind, so many amazing people. But what's been a surprise for you through this experience?
Well, I think everybody feels they have a book inside them. And so this was a great opportunity to not have to bite off more than you can handle. A chapter in a book is a great way to start the process.
Yeah, that is what drew me to it, because as a trained engineer, professional engineer and everything, I had never thought I had a book in me at all. And when I was offered the opportunity to join in volume 10, I was like, sure, like, let's do this. This is a great opportunity. At that point, I never thought I'd write a book, and to be able to contribute a chapter, that really starts to stretch that muscle and makes you believe that you're something else. I know I really appreciated adding the label author to my CV, right? And never thought I would do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the mastermind group, and those have been really phenomenal. And so today is, we just finished one, and it was great timing before I got on with Pete, because we had the benefit of hearing from I don't know if you call him a vocal coach, but he's coached hundreds and hundreds of stars, celebrities, executives, and he asked for volunteers, and I was first out of the box, and so I got feedback around a number of things, in terms of me specifically, and then as we went through the rest of the volunteers, to really learn from them other practical things I could apply to myself.
Yeah, I know. The mastermind has been awesome for me. Like the very first one, we had Dennis Waitley on it, and I was like, what? How did I get into this? I felt really like I was in the wrong place at first. Is this happening? And then every single month we have another great great thought person coming in, another great speaker. Like you mentioned, the foreword by Brian Tracy. Brian Tracy was one of our speakers, as well as his son. And it's an amazing opportunity. That's kind of the icing on the cake. But what I always love about it the most is those breakout rooms where we get to meet each other, where we get to share each other's struggles and our wins and our abilities to support each other and grow the messages. Because if there's one thing all of us have in common, is we have a great message and a great story to share. And the motivation behind it is really about, change and making a positive impact. And that's where I'm really thankful and lucky we have guys like you, Victor, and all the other members of Cracking the Rich Code as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we all are on this same journey of growth, change, development. And it's great to hear from others that are doing the same thing or have had successes. Like one of the breakout room people was in book 6. And so we had the benefit of whatever that is, like a year's worth, 2 years worth of other book that followed, what she would do differently, how it's working for her. And then we always have that opportunity to ask, here's what I'm struggling with. Here's what I need help with. And you put that out to a group. Right now we have the Facebook page. So 300 of people can give you feedback to whatever issue you're dealing with. It's really, icing on the cake, like you said.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough today. In my breakout group, I had Missy, and she was in book 1.
Wow.
So that's really cool to be able to, you see this connection from authors who have been there from the very, very beginning, like you said, and then seeing the new crop of authors coming through and learning their stories. And it's almost like we're always getting a fresh influx of ideas and, people, which is fantastic. So before we kind of wrap up today, I just wanted to ask you, what is something that I didn't bring up that you would like to, kind of shine a light on?
Well, you really covered the waterfront. I think you got all the high points. I think, I'm happy to send your listeners a copy of my article if they're interested. And so my email address is vic@worldclasshr.com. That's the best way to reach me. Of course, you can go to my website, World Class HR. And I'm happy to provide them with a copy. Also happy to do a strategy call if they want to know more about what is this thing, coaching. Tell me more about it. Can I benefit from it? I think my article gives a good, hopefully, I like feedback from people that it gives a good example of what their journey is like, around a coaching program.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's a relationship. I think that's what people need to understand is that, with coaching, you get someone who's really going to look at your blind spots, like where are the things that you're missing. And I think you mentioned it right from the beginning, is awareness. Like how little awareness we get into in our day-to-day lives because we've got our blinders on, we're focused on the goal, wake up, brush your teeth, get to work, make dinner, go to bed. And we don't take that time to step back and look at the big picture. And I think that's what the importance of a coach like Vic or anyone, Victor, like here, like any of us, is can you open up that bandwidth and see the potential of what's out there? I think once people see what's missing, then it's easy to put the building blocks together and move forward.
Right. Well, it's funny. Eric Schmidt, who was CEO of Google and Alphabet later, when he first joined Google, they said, "Oh, by the way, we're going to get you a coach." And he said, "Well, what do you mean? I've already successfully led 4 other companies as CEO. I'm now CEO of Google. As I mentioned before, Pete, the concept, I have arrived, therefore I must be great." He said, "What do I need a coach for?" And now, he's talking about that objective third-party view. There's no one else who has your own best, who want to help you be the best. No, they're motivated to do that in a way that is not self-serving. And you're not going to get that. Even when I was chief HR officer, my president would come to me and ask for feedback. he didn't really want feedback. He couldn't handle it. Whether you can't handle the truth, right?
Yeah.
Am I going to give the president some feedback that he's got all these dead bodies laying around the shop floor? Not if I want to keep my job. So it's definitely something of value.
Yeah. And as you could tell from our interview, I'm never afraid to ask the hard questions, because that's where the real value is, right? And I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the podcast for Cracking the Rich Code. Thank you for being part of this group. Thank you for your contributions. And I can't wait to see you at the next mastermind.
Well, that's same. Thank you for inviting me, and we'll see you next month.
All right. And to everyone else, have a great week, and we'll see you all next week on Cracking the Rich Code.